Dozens of films have been made about World War II. Inglourious Bastards, Stalingrad, Saving Private Ryan, the list is endless. Hollywood has spent decades trying to capture what that war actually looked and felt like, but there is one detail that almost none of them get right, and it involves the men who carried the single most feared weapon on the entire battlefield. That weapon was called the Flammenwerfer 35, and it was handled by an elite group of soldiers known as the Sturmpioniere, the assault pioneers of the German Wehrmacht. The Flammenwerfer 35 was a backpack flamethrower capable of projecting a stream of burning fuel up to 25 meters. It weighed nearly 36 kilograms, held enough fuel for roughly 10 short bursts, and it could clear a fortified bunker in seconds. On paper, it sounds like the perfect weapon. In reality, the men carrying it had a 95% casualty rate, and almost nobody talks about why. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what made these men so lethal on the battlefield, and why that same lethality is what got almost all of them killed. To understand why so many of them died, you first have to understand what they were actually walking into. The Sturmpioniere were specialists trained specifically to breach fortified positions that conventional troops couldn't crack. Their assignments basically revolved around reinforcing bunkers with concrete and packing trenches with defenders who had no intention of moving. They dealt with the most defended, most deadly pockets of resistance on the entire front. An even more sobering realization to these men's reality was the fact that these weren't improvised assignments handed out in desperation. Commanders deliberately selected the Sturmpioniere for the situations that everyone else had already tried and failed to resolve. They were, in the most literal sense, the last option, sent in when every other approach didn't seem to work. This means that before a Sturmpioniere even raised his weapon, he was already in the worst possible place on the battlefield. Now, let's get into the actual reasons why so many of these crews died so consistently. Surprisingly enough, reason number one was the weapon itself. Those tanks on a flamethrower operator's back held between 11 and 14 liters of highly pressurized, highly flammable fuel, and every enemy soldier on the opposing side knew exactly what those tanks contained. Snipers were trained specifically to target flamethrower operators on sight, not at the soldier's body, but at the tanks. A well-placed shot not only wounded the operator, it also ignited the fuel strapped to his back. What happened next didn't require much imagination. The operator didn't get a chance to retreat or call for help. He was simply gone, and that usually happened in a matter of seconds. This was standard practice on both sides of the war. The moment a flamethrower crew was spotted advancing, they became the single highest priority target on the field. Every available weapon, ranging from sniper rifles to machine guns and mortars, were redirected toward them. Stop the flamethrower before it gets close enough to fire, and you save the position. The second reason comes down to the brutal mathematics of effective range. The Flammenwerfer 35 had a maximum range of around 25 to 30 meters. That sounds like a reasonable distance until you picture it on an actual battlefield. 25 meters is roughly the length of 2 school buses. To use the weapon, an operator had to close that distance while under fire, cross open or semi-open ground, and reach a position almost within arm's reach of the enemy before the weapon was even useful. In urban combat, which became the defining reality of the Eastern Front as the war dragged on, that distance shrank even further. In the ruins of Stalingrad, in the fortified cellars of Polish cities, effective range sometimes meant 10 or 15 meters. The operator had to be close enough to almost see the faces of the men he was about to kill. Every meter of that approach was covered by enemy fire, and unlike a standard infantryman, a Sturmpioniere couldn't move quickly or take cover easily. The tanks on his back made him taller, wider, and incredibly slow. The basic survival instincts of infantry combat, drop, roll, sprint, flatten yourself against the earth, were all harder, more awkward, and more dangerous when you were carrying nearly 36 kilograms of pressurized fuel on your shoulders. Now, the third reason why a lot of these flamethrower crews died all boils down to how the opposition responded to them. Typically, when defending soldiers saw a flamethrower operator advancing, they understood with complete clarity what would happen if that man reached them: fire. So the response was that every weapon in the vicinity concentrated on a single target. Accounts from veterans on both sides of the war describe the same pattern. A flamethrower crew begins their approach, and within seconds, every gun in the area is pointing at them. Many crews were cut down before they fired a single burst. Some didn't even make it past the first few meters of their advance. Reason number 4 is that the equipment failed at the worst possible moments. The Flammenwerfer 35 was known to malfunction in cold conditions, and cold conditions were the norm on the Eastern Front for much of the year. This means that a lot of valves froze and pressure seals failed. The hydrogen pilot flame used for ignition could be extinguished by wind, rain, or simply the chaos of combat. An operator would squeeze the trigger under fire, expecting a burst of flame, and get nothing. In those moments, the man was standing in the open, within close range of the enemy, with a weapon that had just stopped working. Retreating meant crossing the same exposed ground he had just spent enormous effort crossing. Staying meant being shot. Attempting to fix the weapon mid-combat, under fire, was honestly the only realistic option. The later Flammenwerfer 41 addressed some of these reliability issues. It was smaller, lighter, and had a more dependable ignition system, but it sacrificed fuel capacity in exchange for portability, which gave the operator even fewer bursts before the weapon ran dry. The core problem being that the man had to be dangerously close to be effective was never solved. It's not like the Germans didn't try to solve it, it's just that it couldn't be solved. That was just the nature of the weapon. The fifth and possibly the most overlooked reason is what happened after the fuel ran out. A flamethrower operator who expended his 10 bursts wasn't done fighting. He was still on a battlefield, still inside or near an enemy position, and now carrying 2 large empty tanks that marked him as clearly as a flare. The tanks didn't stop being a target just because they were empty. In fact, enemy soldiers didn't know they were empty. All they needed was to see the hard-to-miss silhouette of a Sturmpioniere from a distance, and that recognition didn't come with any benefit of the doubt. In theory, crews were supposed to fall back once their fuel was spent, be resupplied, or rotate out of the forward position. In practice, combat doesn't work that cleanly. Crews found themselves stranded in exposed positions, cut off from their unit, and so carrying equipment that was now useless weight. Many flamethrower operators survived the assault itself only to be killed during the withdrawal. A lot of them were still identifiable, still targeted, and still the most dangerous-looking man on the field even with nothing left to fire. So why did German commanders keep sending them? The simple answer to this question is that unfortunately for the Sturmpioniere, their presence on the battlefield was very effective. That's the uncomfortable truth at the center of all of this. Fortified positions that could hold off entire infantry companies for hours sometimes fell within minutes when a Flammenwerfer crew reached them. It didn't matter whether the enemy had concrete bunkers, reinforced cellars, or even the best trench networks. Fire could still reach places that bullets simply couldn't. The psychological effect on defending troops was huge enough that the tactical math kept coming out the same way. The casualties were worth it, at least from the perspective of the men giving the orders. Obviously, the men strapping on those tanks saw things differently. To be assigned to a Sturmpioniere flamethrower unit was understood at every level of the German military as one of the most dangerous roles available. Some soldiers volunteered, drawn by the power of the weapon, the prestige of the specialist role, or sometimes even the promise of additional pay. Others were assigned without being given much say in the matter. Either way, the reality of the assignment didn't change. A 95% casualty rate means that in a unit of 20 men, only one could statistically expect to survive the war. The other 19 knew, on some level, what they were walking toward every time they picked up that weapon.